Hey everybody! Here are 2 times where it could actually make sense to file for Social Security early from a benefit maximization standpoint. Scenario number 1. When the higher earner, unfortunately, has a prognosis of passing away before the typical life expectancy. So a 62-year-old man who might be deciding, when do I take Social Security? His life expectancy in the US is typically 80 or 81 years old. Now, it could make sense to file early if the higher earner has reason to believe from a physician that they will not meet that life expectancy. And the lower earning spouse does not qualify for spousal benefits, meaning the benefits are not less than half of the higher earner. Let's look at Jim and Pam. Jim and Pam, his full retirement age benefit is $3,000 a month. Hers is $2,500, and we're going to assume Jim has indication from a physician that he may not expect to live his full life expectancy. That's number 1 that we'll look at. Number 2 is when the higher earner is much younger than the lower earner, and the lower earner will qualify for spousal benefits, which means it is less than 50% of the higher earner's benefit. So let's say Ray has a benefit of $4,000 at 67, and Deborah has $1,000 a month at 67, which is less than half of that $4,000. And for our purposes, Ray is going to be 5 years younger than Deborah. Okay, let's look at Jim and Pam. This just shows how if you file for benefits early, your benefit is reduced, and if you delay them, they are increased. I think we know that. Here are our percentages to display what that looks like. And because of that, we have the choice of if we're going to file early or late, and that's just what this displays. Here we have a running total of the winning scenario at any given time, whether you file early or late or you delay. So right here we have a break-even point, a popular Social Security term, which it just describes at what point does it become worth it that you delayed rather than filed early. In their case, it is when they are turning 80 years old. That is a pretty typical break-even age. Now, in this scenario, we're going to look at several different times that Jim might pass away and the benefit impact it has on the couple. So we're going to look at every scenario, whether the husband or wife files early or late. So we have 4 scenarios in total. I won't get into all these numbers. We don't need to know them. The only number I do want to look at is the survivorship benefit. I think that's important. So whenever somebody dies, the remaining spouse goes down to 1 check. They get to keep the bigger of either their own check, their spouse's check, or 1 edge case we'll look at. So in the cases where Jim files late, that's scenarios 3 and 4. Pam is going to take his benefit because it's bigger than her own. Now in the instance Jim filed early and Pam filed late over here, she's going to keep her benefit because it's bigger. Okay, so pretty simple. The one that's a little less simple is a special rule that says you can actually, there's 3 options. You can pick either your check, your spouse's check, or you can pick, let's look at the formula, 82.5% of your spouse's full retirement age benefit, if that is bigger, which she did choose. So, okay. We're going to look at the impact of these 4 scenarios over time. We see a break-even age when it benefits them that Jim filed late rather than early at 80 years old. That's what we saw before. Okay, the longer they live, especially the longer Pam lives, the more impactful it was, beneficial it was that Jim filed late rather than early. And that's what I want to focus on. One of the 2 things I want to focus on is in these scenarios where Jim files early rather than late, we see it losing by a couple $100,000 if Pam lives into her late 80s or early 90s. And that's if Jim dies at 84, which is beyond typical life expectancy. Now, how does this change if Jim dies a little sooner, closer to typical life expectancy at 82? We still see it very important that Jim delays his benefits. And in this case, I don't know if you noticed, but the winning scenario switched over from Pam filing late to Pam filing early. although it makes almost no difference. $6,000 lifelong benefits, that's nothing, that's pennies. Okay, let's look at typical life expectancy. Very important that Jim file late rather than early. We still see that theme throughout all these scenarios. Now, it becomes a little more advantageous that Pam happened to file early than late, but still, less than $40,000 lifelong benefit. I'm not concerned about that. Okay, but here we know that Jim has been told by a doctor by the age of 62 that he has reason to believe he will not experience a full life expectancy. So, we're going to look at some of these before typical life expectancy. Okay, if Jim dies at 78, it now benefits Pam, the winning scenario, to have filed early rather than late by a difference of $70,000 lifelong benefits. We're getting to the point where this has some impact. If Jim died at 76, that decision to file early rather than late would actually mean over $100,000 more lifelong benefits, which is interesting. And if Jim dies at 74, it's over $135,000 extra she would have by filing early rather than filing late. Again, whether Jim files early or late, she would really benefit if he files late from a longevity perspective. But for her, if we have that prognosis that Jim is going to pass away, it could really pay to file early. Why is that? Well, simply, if Pam knows and Jim knows that she is going to be collecting his survivorship benefit at some point anyways, and sooner rather than later, it could make sense to spend several years collecting her own benefit while she can collect something. And that is why it benefits her so much to file early rather than late in the case that he dies prematurely. Okay, that's scenario one. Number two, Ray and Deborah. Ray's amount is $4,000 a month at 67, and Deborah's is $1,000 a month. I have an additional table for her because we will be using her spousal benefit. Now, remember, this only works because Ray is much younger than Deborah, 5 years younger. That's the ages over here. Okay, and because it's not going to benefit Deborah to file early, I'm not even looking at that. I want to know if Ray's going to file early or if he's going to file late. So that is what we have here. This is similar to what we saw before, their general break-even age, except the difference is rather than around 80 years old, the break-even point of filing early rather than late is actually, for Ray, 83 to 84 years old. In Deborah, it is when she is turning from 88 to 89 years old, which is very late when you consider break-even analyses. Okay, let's look into why this is. If Ray passes at 84, here are our scenarios. We see that same break-even age here. I want to quickly go through all of these and then explain why it is so impactful. Okay. If he died at 82, we see the same break-even age. If he died at 80, it actually increases from 84 to 85 on him and 89 to 90 on Deborah. Let me say that again. If Ray passed away at 80 years old, which is typical life expectancy, she would need to live until she was 90 to have filing late paid off. It would have been better to have filed early all the way up until the point she was 89. And the earlier Ray passes away, the more this becomes true. It doesn't change at 78, but it does change 1 year further if he dies at 76. That is crazy. The reason for this is if Ray were to file early, he opens up Deborah's ability to draw a spousal benefit off of his benefit. If Ray files late, in this scenario, all that Deborah has to draw on is her own. And so by filing early, Ray is opening up years of her collecting his spousal benefit. And remember, this really only works because her benefit is on the lower end of the spectrum. She qualifies for the spousal benefit period, but this becomes more and more true the bigger of a discrepancy there is. So, scenario number 1 is whenever we see a life expectancy and the higher earner that is less than typical, and the lower earner does not qualify for spousal benefits. We saw that before. Scenario 2, where it makes sense to file early, is for the higher earner when they are much younger than their lower earning spouse. And that was far more impactful that they filed early rather than late. Those are our 2 scenarios today where it makes sense from a benefit maximization standpoint to file early rather than the typical recommendation of filing late.